The situation with human rights in Belarus has been going from bad to worse since August 2020. It has slipped past international attention for obvious reasons, but the reality is that the crackdown has continued. Back then, in 2020, over 50,000 people have been arbitrarily detained. In the following years, the authorities have conducted a purging of the civic space, with hundreds of lawyers lost their licenses, journalists had to flee the country for fear of arrest, media were shut down, civil society organizations have been dissolved. It's like half of the associations that existed in Belarus prior to this human rights crisis have now been dissolved, 1,500 of them. And in this condition, there is no more room for human rights defenders either. Vyasna, for example, has been decapitated, and it's the historical human rights defense organization with Ales Bialiatski, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate of last year, is being behind bars for 10 more years. So in these conditions, it's hard to monitor the situation, but what we know, there are three extremely concerning issues these days. First is that the situation has pushed hundreds of thousands of Belarusians to exile. We have estimations reaching between 500,000 and 1 million people for various reasons who have been compelled to leave the country for the past 3 years. So that creates additional risk of discrimination and human rights violations in exile, especially since February 2022, when Belarusians abroad are being seen as from the country, the co-aggressor country. The legislation has been amended to also prosecute those dissidents, among them on in absentia for so-called extremist crimes. And that one of the punishment is foreseen is the withdrawal of Belarusian citizenship. And actually, the second problem is this. The second main issue, I would say, is this weaponization of the anti-extremist, anti-terrorist legislation. That was the focus of my last report to the General Assembly as special rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Belarus. The third main problem, I would say, is the situation for political prisoners. The human rights defense organizations count 1,500 of them. There might be even more depending on the criterion you use. But one thing is for sure is that since about February, March 2023, dozens of them have been held incommunicado. It means that they are in these punishment cells with no access whatsoever to the outside world, no contact with their lawyers, with their relatives. And this, from a human rights standards perspective, amounts to enforced disappearance, and it probably being used to either dissimulate evidence of torture or possibly death. Most of the governance system can be collectively held accountable for these violations and for the crimes committed. And when we're talking about crimes, we're talking specifically of these enforced disappearances, of these extrajudicial killings which did take place in 2020. Some people dying in prison as we speak as a result of torture or ill treatment, lack of medical treatment, for example. All this makes the law enforcement bodies of the country collectively responsible. The police, the riot police, the tax police, which is harassing people, the KGB, of course, and the penitentiary system, the judiciary. Judges are not independent in Belarus, and they are implementers of this repressive state policy. I think it's important for the future of democracy and human rights on our continent as well to never forget about the violations that were committed, the fact that in this situation of impunity for past violations, there is no guarantee of non-reoccurrence, meaning that perpetrators can feel they can continue to torture and to kill. And therefore, I think it's important that states remember about their also the necessity to support accountability mechanisms. There is one at the UN level. A special mandate has been established in 2021 by the Human Rights Council for the High Commissioner to actually investigate the violations that took place in the context of the 2020 elections. And the last report of this mechanism concluded that some of the violations which occurred then could amount to crimes against humanity. And that puts also responsibility on the governments, of democracies, of democratic states, to actually prosecute these crimes, because we understand they cannot be prosecuted in Belarus these days with the existing judicial system. And for these crimes, countries that do recognize the universal jurisdiction of their tribunals should encourage judges, prosecutors to address these crimes. And well, the victims, as I said, many of the victims are actually on your territory, on our territory, because they were forced to seek exile. They can testify, and perpetrators, one day or another, will have to face justice.